Hello there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today I'm taking you through my own testing of my pattern for a 66 Mustang. It's a foundation paper piece pattern that I created. I need to test it before I can put it up for sale on my Etsy shop. And I test because I occasionally do find mistakes. I found 2 mistakes on this pattern and have fixed those on the pattern. I definitely wanted to make this Mustang in turquoise, and I happen to have a bunch of turquoise left over from my beautiful heritage quilt that I made recently. I'll leave a link for that. I need a light turquoise, and I need an accent darker turquoise. I need a background fabric for the sky or trees or whatever you want to have in the background, and a white, a light gray, a dark gray, and a black. The first thing I normally do is cut out all my pattern pieces. Now some of my pattern pieces go over more than one page. I wanted to quickly show you what I do to match those up. The computer program I use prints a little line on the paper where these 2 pieces should match up. I like to cut a little serpentine or a zigzag line so that line shows. Then when I place one piece over the top of the second piece, that line shows through and I can match up the edges of the pattern, the dotted line, the solid line, and the joining line. Then I can tape these 2 pieces together and I'm good to go. On this pattern, sections I through P are very small indeed, so I took a minute to rewrite the letter for the section on those tiny pieces. This pattern has 27 sections, capital A through capital Z, plus a small letter A. Now this is a very advanced foundation paper piece pattern. If you would like to learn how to foundation paper piece, I'm going to leave some information in my description. What you see me doing here is cutting out a piece of fabric for each piece on each section. So for example, some of these tire sections have 36 different pieces. And there are 2 sections in this pattern that are simply one piece of fabric. I like to go through all my pieces and get each piece of fabric for each section stacked in order, so then I am ready to go to the sewing machine. Here's that stack of my pieces that are ready to sew. You can see right on top is small letter A. It's one piece of fabric. The one I'm going to show you slowly though is one of the tire sections. I've got my little pieces of fabric ready to go. I've got that light gray to start the inside of my tire. I've got the dark gray and then the black for the tire itself, and then some more light gray. I've got a small wool pressing mat and my hot iron ready to go. No steam in the iron, and I'm setting my stitch length to 1.5. So the mind-bending thing about foundation paper piecing is you are looking at the pattern, but that is a reverse image of the pattern. We are going to put the fabric on the back of this paper right side down. We're going to get a mirror image of the printed image. Piece number 1 and 2 have a line where they come together. I want to make sure I'm going to put piece number 2 right sides together on the back with piece number 1 and make sure they overlap the line that I'm going to stitch. Then I can stitch that tiny, tiny line. And I always stitch about 2 stitches before and about 2 stitches after. After every addition, I trim all the excess thread. Then I'm going to fold my paper on that stitch line gently, very, very gently, and trim away the excess bulk to about 1/4 of an inch or a little less. Press the second piece open and press it flat. Now I'm ready to add piece 3. I need to make sure when I add that to the back, the fabrics are right sides together and making sure there's enough seam allowance overlapping the line. Again, I'm going to trim away all those threads that I just created. I'm going to fold my paper on that stitch line very gently. I'll trim away excess bulk and then press that seam open. But wait, I just discovered I made a mistake here. I stitched my overlap seam on the wrong side. So when I flip it, it's not in the place it should be. I had it overlapping that seam line the wrong way. So I'm going to have to pick out this seam gently and carefully and redo piece number 3. Put a little piece of tape on that pattern. Since I pulled out that seam, it kind of tore a little bit, so I just wanted to make sure it stayed whole. All right, here we go again. I'm going to place this right sides together on the back, and I want to make sure the bulk of my fabric is going away from the line that I'm going to sew, because it's going to fold back in the opposite direction. So when it's pressed open, you want that to be covering the number 3. With that line restitched, I'm going to trim away all the excess threads I just created. Then I'll fold that paper very carefully on that stitch line that I just stitched. Trim away all the bulk from that seam, and then I will press that fabric open. Now, one thing I like to do when I'm adding another piece, sometimes I will fold the fabric towards me so I can make sure I've got a 1/4 inch seam allowance. With lighter fabrics, it's not such a big deal. You can see through the paper, through the lighter fabric, you can see that your fabric is overhanging the stitch line. But with this dark gray and the black that I'm going to be using, yeah, it's hard to see through all of that. I skipped ahead a few pieces. We're now going to start adding the black, which is the actual tire, to this pattern. So I'm starting back on the same side as piece number 2 here, and I'm adding piece number 7. Now, the bigger the pieces get, the easier it gets. Those first few pieces on a circle like this are very hard, but once you get to the bigger little pieces, it goes a little bit more quickly. All right, we'll get piece 8 added here. So I'm making sure I have enough overhang for my seam allowance, making sure I've got my angle correct, and I'm actually sewing on the right line. I stitch that line a couple stitches ahead, a couple stitches after, trim all my threads. Then I gently fold the paper on the line I just stitched, cut away the excess bulk, and press the fabric open. So you can see we're getting that circular look, first with the light gray inner circle, then the dark gray first circle, and then the tire is that black circle. I've skipped ahead here to piece number 18, so we're going to go ahead and add that last little triangle on there, and then we have a small rectangle to add, and then piece 20 is a little bit larger rectangle to add. All right, well, I wanted to show you, I'm trying to get piece 20 lined up. It is easier for me to trim off these sides so I can see where to line up my piece 20. Sometimes if your piece of paper is too big, you just can't see what you're doing. And now section G, which is one of 4 different tire sections, is complete except for trimming. I continued assembling my pieces, not necessarily in letter order. I usually like to do it in letter order, but in this case, I really wanted to get those tire sections done first. They are the absolute hardest, so I worked on a couple of those. So that first tire section I did, G, had the light gray where the road is. This one has that turquoise where the car is, plus that dark turquoise shadowing around the tire. Once these are trimmed and stitched together, they're going to line up very nicely. And I thought it might amuse you to see my little pile that's sitting to my right. I kind of just scoot the scraps over, and then before I toss them in the trash, I pick out ones that are big enough to use. And I have some tape on my sewing machine, so I can just toss a piece of thread onto that tape. I wanted to go through slowly one of the easier pieces. This little section only has 3 pieces. We're going to take piece 1 and piece 2, place them right sides together with each other, and then I'm going to make sure that the seam allowance overlaps that line. And then when I stitch these together, the same thing, I will trim the threads, I will trim away the excess bulk from the seam, and press the fabric open. Piece 3 has a slight angle to the seam, so with the fabric wrong side up, I try to match up that angle with the line that I cut. So when I stitch this on the back, right sides together, it's going to flip right up correctly. Before I got through, I did have to refill all my bobbins and change the thread on top of my machine, but that's okay. Once I had all these sections stitched together, it was time to trim on the dotted line. For small pieces like the one I have here, I will just take scissors and trim on the lines. Now some of the straight lines do have little cutouts at the corners, little angles to help put these in the correct alignment with other pieces. So it's important to make sure you're cutting those little extra angles as well. For other pieces, if I feel more comfortable, I will place the pattern piece on my cutting mat and use my ruler to cut around on the dotted lines. With all my sections trimmed to the correct size, it's time to start assembling the pieces according to my instructions. These small pieces can be very, very fiddly. I like to use clips to check and see if I've got my pieces lined up right, and if when I open these two pieces up, I will have a nice straight edge. Clips are very handy, but honestly, this pattern is very difficult. There are a lot of small pieces, a lot of fiddly pieces, but I really do love foundation paper piecing. I'm willing to put up with the fiddliness of it all and come up with beautiful fabric art. For less difficult or simpler patterns, sometimes it is recommended to leave the paper on until you've finished sewing the entire block. With these tiny sections, for me, it works better if I take some of the paper at least away, especially if I'm going to be sewing a third seam over the top of a second and first seam, because then it becomes impossible to get those little pieces of paper out. So what you see me doing here is what I normally do, which is if I don't think I can get to this paper later, I'm going to take it off and just be very careful not to stretch my fabric. I'm going to speed through the rest of this assembly. You'll be able to see on my ironing mat this picture as it starts to become complete. It starts out with little tiny pieces that don't even look like anything, and then little by little the picture grows into something we can recognize. I ripped out a seam here. The little pieces called section I through P make one little unit, and that gets sewed to another section. I didn't get that on straight, so I did want to redo it because that is the scoops on the side of the Mustang. Very important part for the look, and I wanted it to look right. It's almost a completed project. Well, I want to jump and shout in the air because I did it. Here is that beautiful, beautiful 66 Mustang in my favorite color, turquoise. I love it, and I hope you do too. If you're enjoying my channel, I invite you to subscribe and hit the bell icon if you want to get notified when I post new videos. And I also just want to say thank you for joining me today, and I hope to see you back again real soon.